An 8-year-old girl named Mila disappeared near the tree line. Noah rushed through the branches and found her. Mila was standing perfectly still in the heavy shadows. Thin, unnaturally cold hands emerged directly from the roots and shadows, grabbing at his ankles to drag him down into the dirt. To a photographer like Ethan, 30 years of abandonment sounded like an invitation. He arrived in the coastal village of Brinewick with a camera and a heavy dose of arrogance, brushing past the locals and ignoring an old woman's warning to stay away from the cliffside lighthouse after sunset. He reached the top of a narrow, broken path as cold salt water sprayed from the waves below. Before him stood a towering, rusted structure. Its stone was cracked. Its windows were as black as empty eyes. This is the starting point for atmospheric dread, a slow, deliberate construction of a space where everything is visibly broken, yet suspiciously quiet. The opening prose uses long sentences flowing smoothly left to right, detailing visual emptiness to lull the reader. This creates a psychological vacuum. Establishing the environment as dead and abandoned strips away expectation, making the anomaly hit harder from absolute zero. Then, the light turns on. A powerful beam erupts from the top of the dead structure, cutting through the dark. Instead of turning back, Ethan watches the heavy door creak open and steps inside the darkness. Effective horror establishes rigid rules for a setting, like the total absence of power, and then weaponizes a sudden, impossible occurrence to violate those rules. The moment Ethan crosses the threshold, the world shrinks. The air is thick and damp, smelling faintly of rot. The walls are lined with warped, decades-old photographs of people who are all smiling, yet slightly blurred. As he climbs a spiraling staircase into the dark, a rhythmic, mechanical sound begins to echo from above. Metal grinding against metal. At this point, the narrative pivot is complete. The expansive visual tension of the exterior cliffside has been replaced by auditory and olfactory cues. By removing the horizon line and focusing on immediate bodily senses, the story traps the reader. You can no longer see the danger from a distance. You are bound to the protagonist's tight, suffocating physical space. This shift effectively compresses the world. It replaces the distant landscape with the immediate, inescapable proximity of the character's surroundings. Ethan continues climbing. The steps groan, the temperature drops, and the clanking of gears grows deafening. Halfway up, he finds a warning carved deep into the wall. Don't look into the light. As Ethan's panic mounts, the structure on the page changes. Dense paragraphs dissolve into isolated sentence fragments. These sharp fragments force the reader's eyes to jump rapidly down the page, shrinking visual distance and accelerating reading speed. This rapid pace triggers a biological response. Forcing the eyes to dart across short bursts of text subconsciously accelerates the reader's own heart rate. You are consuming information in short, panicked bursts. The rhythm of the prose now mimics the shortened breaths of an induced panic attack. Manipulating the pacing of the words forces your physiology to react to the text. The writing closes in on the reader's breath, just as the lighthouse walls close in on Ethan. Ethan reaches the lantern room to find a massive lens rotating blindly. There is no operator, no controls, and no power source. Then, the grinding stops. The beam freezes, pointing directly at Ethan. Inside the blinding glare, a twisted, unnaturally tall figure slowly steps forward. Ethan turns to flee, but the door slams shut. A voice fills his head, declaring that no one leaves the light. The story utilizes the abrupt cessation of sound and motion to deliver its final blow. By cutting off the relentless rhythm and replacing it with total stillness, the narrative creates a tension that is heavier than a loud jump scare. Morning arrives quietly. Days later, a fisherman finds Ethan's camera on the cliffside path. The photos inside are distorted and unusable, except for one clear shot. In the top window, standing inside the light, is a figure with a stretched face and a twisted body, smiling. Ethan is now part of the light. The prose functions in lockstep with the plot. As Ethan is pulled into the light, The reader is pulled into the specific, claustrophobic rhythms of the text. This experience is built through the transition from wide, rhythmic descriptions to immediate sensory cues, and finally to the physiological impact of fragmented line breaks. Masterful horror uses the mechanics of language to anchor the reader to the panic of the protagonist. It ensures a visceral dread lingers long after the reading stops. Rizwan hit play. With the device running on phantom power, the boundary between his known reality and what was happening in his hands began to blur. Rizwan was alone in the quiet of a house that no longer belonged to anyone. His uncle had recently passed away, leaving behind an attic packed with decades of dust-covered junk, which Rizwan was slowly clearing out. Buried among the forgotten boxes, he uncovered a relic, a heavy, tape-based analog camcorder, the kind of handheld device that hasn't seen the light of day in at least 20 years. It was a completely dead piece of electronics. There was no battery pack slotted into the back, no charging cable nearby, and absolutely nothing tethering it to a power source. But when Rizwan casually pressed the power button, the screen flickered to life, and glowing right in the corner of that tiny monitor was a battery icon, displaying a 100% charge. Basic physics dictated that the machine should be dead, but human curiosity is a powerful thing, and instead of putting the device back in the box, Rizwan hit play. With the device running on phantom power, the boundary between his known reality and what was happening in his hands began to blur. The footage began by showing a dimly lit room. Rizwan immediately recognized the couch, the table, and the clock on the wall. The camcorder was broadcasting his exact living room, located just down the stairs. He checked his phone. His present reality was 1:52 a.m. The camcorder's broadcast was 19 minutes ahead, at 2:11 a.m. With every passing second, the gap between his reality and the on-screen events steadily collapsed. Inside that 19-minute window, the front door of the empty living room opened. Rizwan watched his physical double walk inside, wearing identical clothes, and sit down on the couch. The version of him inside the video turned its head to stare directly into the camera lens with an unnatural smile and spoke. "You're watching." The figure on the screen was looking through the glass and into the attic, responding to Rizwan's presence in real time. Suddenly, the broadcast broke. The footage aggressively glitched, snapping away from the living room downstairs. The camera now transmitted from a terrifying new perspective. It broadcasted the exact present moment in the attic, framing the back of Rizwan's own head. Rizwan turned around slowly to check the space behind him. In physical reality, the attic was entirely empty, but when he looked back at the screen in his hands, he saw it. A towering, faceless entity was standing directly behind his digital avatar. On the tiny monitor, the figure leaned in close. It tilted its head, studying him, and explicitly whispered a single command through the camera's speaker. "Don't turn around." Every instinct screamed at him to look behind him, but to do so would be to acknowledge the presence the camera was showing him. He squeezed his eyes shut and froze completely in place, desperate to obey the twisted rule. Then the timeline began to jump. Time fast-forwarded across the screen, minutes turning into hours, the physical camcorder violently vibrating in his hands. He watched a grim prophecy play out on the monitor. His future digital self inevitably failed to hold still, slowly turning around to look at the entity, and screaming before the feed cut to static. When the screen flickered back, it was morning. Police officers were walking through his living room, talking over each other, noting no signs of forced entry, and that Rizwan had vanished without a trace. The footage zoomed in on the living room wall, where a single word had been scrawled across the plaster in dark, uneven letters. Recorded. The screen finally went black. The camera shut off, plunging the real-world attic back into absolute silence, giving Rizwan a brief, false sense of relief. Then he felt it. A soft, cold breath on the back of his neck, accompanied by a whisper telling him it was his turn. Observing his own future was the exact catalyst required to trap him in it. The residents of Larkov Village operate under a strict, unwritten curfew. This schematic illustrates their local folklore, a long-standing belief that the geography of the woods actually shifts and rearranges itself at night to consume anyone caught inside after sunset. Noah had no reason to believe them. As an experienced search and rescue volunteer, he spent his life tracking lost hikers through rough terrain. He understood topography as something fixed, something that could be conquered with GPS, maps, and logic. But his reliance on protocol was tested when an 8-year-old girl named Mila disappeared near the tree line. She had been missing for nearly 6 hours. Despite explicit warnings from locals about the impending dusk, Noah entered the forest just as the sky turned purple. Noah viewed the forest as a predictable set of physical variables. By treating a highly irrational environment as a standard rescue operation, he immediately placed himself at a severe disadvantage. At first, his methodology worked exactly as intended. He easily located a trail of small, fresh footprints and followed them deep into the trees. 10 minutes later, the physics of his environment broke. The footprints didn't fade into harder ground, and they didn't scatter in a new direction. They completely stopped mid-step, leaving no trace of where the 8-year-old could have gone. As Noah stood trying to process the impossible physical evidence, a massive sensory vacuum dropped over the area. The wind died. The insects went silent. Every ounce of ambient noise vanished from the dense pines. With the physical tracks gone and the environment silent, Noah was now the target of an active ambush. Attempting to reassert control over his surroundings, Noah fell back on basic survival. He used his knife to carve a simple mark into the bark of a nearby tree to establish a trail. He turned away for a fraction of a second. When he looked back, the bark was entirely smooth and unbroken. If we map the environment around a subject in the Larkov woods, we can see how the spatial rearrangement works. Trees remain normal when viewed directly, but outside the line of sight, geometry alters. By continuously collapsing the gaps behind Noah, the environment erases his path, forcing him deeper into the anomaly. The forest does not wait for its prey to get lost. It actively weaponizes its own physical geography to render compasses, GPS, and trail markers entirely useless. With Noah disoriented, the entity deployed an auditory lure. A weak, trembling child's voice echoed from a nearby cluster of trees, begging for help. Noah rushed through the branches and found her. Mila was standing perfectly still in the heavy shadows, her back turned away from him. When she finally turned to face him, the illusion fractured. Her eyes were far too wide, and her skin looked as though it had been uncomfortably stretched over an incorrect frame. When she spoke, her voice glitched, layering the child's tone over something deep and resonant. The thing spoke with a dual voice, claiming it had answered Mila's original cries for help just to take her form. By using the child's image, the entity exploited the very instinct that brought Noah into the woods, turning his drive to rescue into a fatal liability. With the bait revealed, the physical threat rapidly escalated. Massive, ancient trees leaned inward, moving to physically crush the space around him. As the physical walls closed in, the entity launched a psychological strike. The overlapping voices whispering from the woods suddenly isolated into a single distinct cry. It was the voice of Noah's sister, who had died years ago, begging him for help. Thin, unnaturally cold hands emerged directly from the roots and shadows, grabbing at his ankles to drag him down into the dirt. The forest ensures a successful capture through simultaneous pressure. It triggers the victim's deepest personal grief to paralyze the mind, right as it physically suffocates the body. Cornered by impossible physics and traumatic hallucinations, Noah finally abandoned logic. He realized his professional training was useless here, forcing him to rely entirely on the exact folklore he had ignored hours earlier. He executed the only defense the locals had prescribed. He squeezed his eyes shut, ignored the screams, and sprinted forward without looking back. He ran blindly through the shifting roots until he violently burst out of the tree line, collapsing onto the silent, completely static asphalt of the main road. By abandoning logic for the village's superstitions, Noah managed to reach the safety of the road. When search teams found him hours later, he was covered in dirt and barely spoke. From the outside, the edge of the Larkoff forest looked perfectly normal, its trees entirely still. Despite extensive sweeps over the following days, the objective was a failure. The teams recovered no footprints, no torn clothing, and no trace of Mila. Noah returned home, but he quickly discovered a lasting consequence of his entry. Late at night, sitting in his own bedroom, he continues to hear a child's voice outside his window, begging him for help. A victim might manage to physically run out of the Larkoff trees, but the entity's psychological tether ensures that once it learns your mind, you can never truly leave it behind. When the sun rose over the highway, Amon's car sat idling on the shoulder. No glass lay on the pavement, the chassis was unmarked, but Amon was nowhere to be found. Every door was locked from the inside, the central locking system engaged, and child safety latches active. The windows rolled up. There is no gap in this perimeter. To leave, Amon had to break a window, yet the seals remained intact. He was simply gone. In the middle of the passenger seat, scrawled into the leather in wet, dark blood, were 2 words: "Welcome back." Physical entry and exit were impossible. To find where he went, we have to look at the data Amon followed in the hours before the car was found. 12 hours earlier, Amon was on a route he had driven 100 times, the familiar road from Islamabad to his village. He knew every pothole and every landmark by heart. That familiarity ended when his GPS blinked and suggested a faster route. He turned. The road immediately narrowed. The streetlights vanished, leaving only his headlights to cut through the dark. A fog rolled in that didn't behave like weather. It moved with a rhythmic, pulsing motion against the glass, heavy and silent. He drove for miles without making a single turn, yet he passed the same rusted welcome back sign twice. The GPS had led him off the mapped highway and into a loop. He was no longer following a road. He was following an instruction into a space that shouldn't exist. Amon stepped out of the car. The April air was freezing. The wind had died, and the sound of insects had cut out entirely. He touched the sign. The letters weren't painted. They were coated in a thick, dark fluid that was still warm to the touch. From the fog behind him, a whisper broke the silence. "You came back." Behind him, his car door began to move. It didn't swing. It creaked open inch by inch, as if something inside was making room. His headlights flickered. In that split second, he saw a figure in his passenger seat, a pale face with black eyes, its neck tilted at a sharp, broken angle. Amon didn't wait for the lights to steady. He scrambled back into the driver's seat and sped into the fog. The warmth of the blood on his hand was real. Whatever was in the seat was no longer a trick of the light. It was now inside the car with him. The road stretched on without exits. Amon drove, but the landscape never changed. The GPS screen suddenly flared to life. It displayed 2 words: destination reached. The engine cut out. The dashboard lights died, and the headlights failed, leaving him in the dark. He heard breathing beside his ear. Before he could move, a cold hand clamped onto the wrist he used to touch the blood. 2 black eyes opened inches from his face. Then the breathing stopped. When the car died and the doors locked, the space became a container. There was no way to run and no way to see what was coming. This is why the police found the car exactly as it was, sealed, idling, and empty in the morning light. The message on the seat wasn't just a note. It was a record of what happened the moment Amon stepped off the known path. We trust our tools to find the most efficient route, But Aman's story suggests that some shortcuts lead to places the map was never meant to find. Block C is a standard residential building, defined by scuffed concrete and the low hum of an aging electrical system. At its center sits a solitary elevator, the only way up for hundreds of residents. The control panel inside the car features a common architectural omission. As seen here, the numbers jump from 12 directly to 14, leaving a physical gap in the sequence. The danger begins when the car ignores these numbers entirely. Without warning, the lift will stall, hanging suspended between floors in total silence. To survive this stall, residents follow 3 specific commands. Do not press anything, do not speak, and whatever you do not look at the panel. These rules function as a survival manual for a spatial trap. Ignoring them initiates a sequence that the elevator was never designed to handle. Armin was a new tenant, a skeptic who viewed the building's lore as nothing more than tired urban legends. He had no interest in stories whispered in the hallways. Late one night, exhausted from a long shift, he stepped into the elevator alone. He was the only person in the lobby and the only person in the car. He pressed the button for the 8th floor. The doors slid shut, and the elevator began a routine, quiet ascent through the dark shaft. He leaned against the wall, confident in the mundane physics of the building, unaware that he had just entered the kill zone of the Block C anomaly. The elevator slowed and stopped, not at a floor, but in the dead space between them. The lights flickered once, then settled into a dim, steady glow. Armin's impatience immediately overrode the building's rules. He reached out and pressed the button for the 8th floor again, then a 3rd time, trying to force the machine to respond. A soft click came from the panel. Slowly, another button lit up in the empty space. It glows with a faint, sickly light, marked with the number 13. The elevator jerked and began to move, but it wasn't moving up. The floor indicator went blank as the air in the cab turned freezing, turning Armand's breath into a thick fog. When the doors finally slid open, they revealed a void. There was no hallway, only an endless, heavy darkness pressing against the opening of the car. A broken voice crackled through the speaker, announcing the 13th floor. Terror finally replaced Armand's skepticism. He broke the 2nd rule, calling out into the darkness. "Hello?" By interacting with the panel and the void, Armand has removed the safety of the elevator shaft. The cab is now a fragile box, drifting in a dimension where the standard laws of the building no longer apply. A shape stepped out of the darkness. It was tall and thin, with limbs that bent in directions that defied human anatomy. Its skin looked incorrectly fitted, as if it had been stretched over the wrong frame. When Armand tried to retreat, the thing tilted its head. It whispered that he had looked. By staring at the panel and acknowledging the 13th floor, Armand had broken the final seal. The creature explains that Armand now belongs here. By noticing the anomaly and engaging with it, he has essentially verified his presence on a floor that shouldn't exist. As the creature reaches into the light of the elevator, Armand lunges at the panel. He smashes every button at once, his hands shaking as he tries to force the doors to close. The doors finally slam shut, and the elevator immediately drops. It feels like a total removal of gravity, a violent plummet through the darkness as the cables seem to vanish entirely. This free fall marks his final exit from the physical world. He is no longer dropping through the building. He is falling into the entity's permanent domain. The elevator hits the bottom with a violent jolt. The lights return to their full brightness, and the doors open to the warm, familiar hallway of the 8th floor. Armand stumbles out, gasping for air. He is back in the real world, surrounded by the mundane carpet and wallpaper of Block C. He believes he has escaped. Behind him, the elevator remains open. The panel still shows the number 13. And as this view shows, the entity is no longer in the void. It is standing in the back corner of the car, watching him. The The next morning, Armand was gone. No one saw him leave, and no cameras caught anything. The curse of Block C remains active. Late at night, the elevator still stalls between floors, waiting for a passenger to lose their patience and look at the buttons. The horror isn't just the entity. It's the fact that Armand is now part of the trap. If the car stops for you, check the reflection in the metal walls. He's standing right behind you, waiting for his floor. Imagine waking up in a place you don't remember traveling to. The fluorescent lights are buzzing overhead, the metal seats are ice cold, and the entire airport terminal around you is completely empty. That's exactly where Sarah Malik finds herself, and the only clue she has is the piece of paper neatly folded in her hand, a boarding pass. It has her name, a gate, and a time, but the destination is just a row of blank dashes. Her head is throbbing. She tries to trace her steps back, trying to remember booking a flight, packing a bag, or even driving to the airport. But there's nothing, just a complete blank. The physical evidence in her hand defies the basic logic of travel. A boarding pass represents a contract to be moved from one point to another, yet this one offers no destination at all. Sarah is standing in a functional airport that has no function. She has the paperwork for a journey that, according to the document in her hand, leads nowhere. As the initial shock wears off, she notices she isn't actually alone. A few other people are scattered around the terminal, but they're all sitting in absolute silence, staring straight ahead in the exact same direction. Desperate for answers, she walks up to a man nearby and asks for help. He doesn't answer right away. When he finally turns his head, the movement is incredibly slow, as if he's fighting against a heady weight. Looking closely at him, Sarah realizes his eyes are completely dull. They are unfocused and glassy, lacking any trace of active thought or recognition. In a flat, rehearsed voice, he just tells her the gate number, and when she asks where the plane is going, he simply says, "You'll see." Then his mouth stretches into a smile so wide it looks like it's causing him physical pain. Every instinct in her body screams at her to run. But before she can take a single step, a distorted announcement crackles through the overhead speakers, cutting through the silence with a blast of static. The people around her do not react like travelers checking their watches. They sit like objects, waiting to be moved, having already lost whatever it is that makes them human. The voice on the intercom announces boarding for Flight 13. It doesn't name an airline or a city, yet the command is unmistakable. At that exact millisecond, every single person in the terminal stands up. They move in perfect synchronization, their bodies snapping into a forward-facing posture. Sarah tells herself she doesn't have to go. She tries to hold her ground, but her feet begin to move on their own, carrying her forward despite her mind's refusal. She tries to stop her momentum, but her legs keep pace with the crowd. She is forced to march down a narrow corridor, her body no longer answering her commands. The corridor ends abruptly at a single white door. Behind it, there is no jet bridge or runway, only a thick, impenetrable dark. A man in uniform stands beside it. Sarah's hand lifts to hand him the pass. He scans it, leans in, and whispers that she is right on time. The trap is complete. Sarah's own nervous system has been turned against her, pulling her into the darkness of gate C13 as if she were nothing more than luggage. She steps through the dark doorway and suddenly finds herself surrounded by light. She is inside a plane cabin, but the physical space makes no sense. The seats are much too narrow and packed too tightly. As she looks down the aisle, the rows stretch endlessly into the distance, far beyond the physical limits of any aircraft that could ever take flight. Her body forces her into an empty seat. The moment she sits down, the seatbelt clicks shut with mechanical finality, locking her into place. The cabin lights dim. A voice comes over the intercom, a chorus of multiple tones speaking at once, announcing that the flight has no destination. The voice explains that the passengers were chosen for a simple reason. They looked. They were noticed by something that has been watching from the shadows. Sarah looks around in terror as the air grows freezing cold. The passengers begin to change. Their faces blur and warp, as if a new physical structure is pushing to the surface from underneath their skin. The voice clarifies the purpose. Flight 13 exists to systematically replace every human being on board. The person sitting directly next to Sarah turns her head. It's her own face. An exact identical copy is staring back at her with a sinister smile, whispering that Sarah won't be leaving the flight. This endless cabin is a mechanism for erasure. It strips away every passenger's original identity, preparing the copies to take their place in the world above. Sarah screams, thrashing against her restraints. As she struggles, the plane itself begins to shake violently. The walls ripple and distort, losing their solid form. In a sudden flash, she sees rows upon rows of seats, filled with slightly distorted, wrong copies of humanity. All of them are watching. All of them are waiting for their turn. Then, the chaos simply stops. Morning breaks over an ordinary, sunny airport. A commercial plane lands smoothly on the tarmac. Passengers start filing out into the terminal one by one, smiling and chatting. Among them is Sarah. The transition is perfect. The violent process of replacement is over, and these entities are now ready to re-enter society without anyone noticing the change. The new Sarah walks calmly through the bright terminal. Her eyes are steady. She checks her phone with the natural ease of someone who has done it 1,000 times. Someone in the crowd accidentally bumps into her shoulder, a brief moment that would expose any lack of human social grace. She doesn't miss a beat. She turns, offers a polite apology, and flashes a warm smile. The copy is performing its role flawlessly. But as she walks away, the illusion breaks for just a fraction of a second. Her reflection in a passing window doesn't match her movements. While the woman looks straight ahead, the reflection turns. It smiles with a mouth that is too wide and whispers, "Boarding soon." The danger of Flight 13 lies in its silence. The original victims are gone, and in their place are things that look, speak, and smile exactly like the people we think we know.